Sid here, and welcome to the Drunken Ork. Well, I've recently written a 2,000 point Dread Mob army. It's quite fluffy, it's probably not very meta, but I want to give it a shot. And the way I do my orks is I don't generally run one clan. I do as far as the rules are concerned, but as far as the painting goes, I think I'd get demented if I just stuck to one colour scheme for the entirety, so I generally branch out. I think a wash should represent a number of different clans. So, of the 7 Deff Dreads I've already got, I've got 3 Goth ones painted up. They're all combat and close-up related. I've got 3 Death Skull ones painted up, which are a mixture of claws and custom Mega Blasters. And I want to get 3 Badmoon ones painted up. Now I've got one who's equipped entirely with custom Mega Blasters. The other 2 I want, one's going to be fully shooters, one's going to be fully rockets. This video is looking how I put together the fully shooter Dread. Although, to be fair, I did give him a saw as well, just in case I wanted to, actually make him do something in combat instead of just firing ineffective shots all game and then dying. So anyway, yeah. Without further ado, let's look at the build. So sometime back in 2021 I built this for my salamanders. And as you can see, he's got one of them big plasma gun things on his arm. Plasma incinerators, I think they're called. Which meant I had this bit left over. Heavy onslaught Gatling cannon. Big minigun, big ammo box, big ammo feed, big chunky gun. And I thought, I've got to put that on a Deff Dread. And that was basically the spark behind the Badmoon Shooter Dread. So Deff Dreads can have 4 arms. The bottom ones are smaller, the top ones are larger. So I got one of the larger ones, cut the bottom half off it, and stuck the Gatling cannon to the bottom of that at a slight angle. I padded it out with a few more bits of plastic, and here it is, a bit rough and ready. I did add a little bit of sprue glue to smooth it out and try to sort of, not so much sculpt that, but score a little bit more detail into it, so it was not quite as messy really. And that was the main shooter arm. For the lower left shooter arm, I fancied a couple of heavy bolters. Now I've got loads of spare heavy bolters because I rarely use them. So I took 2 off, I think it was a Land Raider kit. And although they've got the ammo feed, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. Now Marines might be happy with their ammo on the inside of the vehicle, but Orks obviously see that as a bit of a stupid thing, because if it gets hit and explodes inside the vehicle, it's going to cause problems. So keep it on the outside where it's nice and safe. So I stuck a couple of ammo boxes, one off a killer can, one off a Deff Dread, just at the end of the ammo feeds, so they've got some sort of magazine. I also thought if I'm going to do a Deff Dread with 4 big shooters, although I think it'll look cool, I think it'll be next to useless in a game. Not meta, not almost meta, but pretty much useless. I don't think 4 big shooters is going to do a great deal with Ork accuracy, 0 AP and only 1 damage. And if you give a Deff Dread for them, it means you're stuck with 3 attacks in combat, at base strength, again, no AP and 1 damage. So just to oomph that up a little bit, I thought I'll give him a saw just in case I want to run 3 in a saw, which will put him on around strength 10 minus 3 AP, 3 damage for 4 attacks, which is a lot better in combat. So to do that, I mounted a heavy bolters on either side of a buzzsaw from the kill can kit. Only a little bit of trim in there to get it to fit nicely, and stuck it on the end of an arm, so he's got the option of swinging the saw around or using the heavy bolters more like a pistol. For the upper left arm, again from the Land Raider kit, I think it's on the Crusader build, it's got 2 banks of bolt rifles. 6 aside, big chunky bolters, and I thought, you know what, you can't get much more shootery than that. So again, I took part of one of the upper Deff Dread arms, snipped it down just as a mounting point, fixed the bolters to it, and stuck one of the armour panels on with tank tracks on the battle wagon, just hanging from the bottom. I love these, I never put them on battle wagons. I hang them from weapons as like little banners and pendants. I stick them on the back of wheels to act as mud guards. I think they've got loads of uses. Maybe one day I'll build a battle wagon and put them on guarding the tracks, but I haven't yet. And on the lower right arm, I decided to use the standard Ork Deff Dread big shooter. Now for the legs, I wanted to do a tripod. I thought of a hexagonal shape, mounted just under the main body of the Dread, with a leg coming out front and then 2 at the back, equally spaced around it, so I thought hexagonal shape would be spot on for that. I cut about 3 out of plastic card and realised I can't cut a hexagonal shape. They were all wonky as hell. Now that might be quite orky, but it's not what I wanted. However, I did find a hexagonal base from the olden days. So I took that, I cut 6 separate fascias for it, and mounted them onto the tapered side to get a nice little shape to base the legs on. Then from plastic card I cut out another 2 shapes using the main body as a template just to cap off the top and bottom. I also had to trim off the bottom of the Deff Dread body, as you can see here, just to form a place where I can actually mount it to. I've got 3 Deff Dread legs, and on the inside of the upper part of the leg, which has a depression which fits onto the Deff Dread, I just blanked it off with a bit of plastic card. I then used a grinder just to basically carve out a little indent where I could fit these. Now these are actually off some little toy cannons. These are the missiles it fires. Now if you snip the end off, you've got something which looks like a barrel or a hinge with a couple of little joints sticking out either end, which is pretty nice. So I cut 3 of those off and then sanded them down so they had a flat surface on one side. The flat bit would glue to the hexagonal body, and then the more curved side would fit nicely into those little indents I'd ground into the tops of the legs. I cut out 3 extra armour plates and roughed up the edges, and then glued it all together. Added a few rivets as well, of course. On top I'd put a little bit of plumbing pipe, which I super glued in place, and then added a little bit more super glue in bicarb soda just to sort of get a stronger bond to the hexagonal bit. And that would obviously connect directly to the upper Deff Dread body. Now after a quick dry fit, with all 3 legs connected to the hexagonal base with blue tack, they did tend to hang over the 60mm base by quite a bit. Deff Dread's got quite long feet. So what I had to do was, as you can see here, I cut the toes off the Deff Dread. I then trimmed part of the section of the toe cap off, and then just glued it into place with plastic glue, just to get a shorter footprint on the footprint, if that makes sense. It wasn't a very strong bond, so I turned them upside down, filled them full of super glue, sprinkled bicarb, and solid as a rock. There we go, sits on the base nicely, looks pretty cool as far as I'm concerned. Tripod dreadnought, much more stable. Don't know how it would walk, didn't put any thought into that. Now because this was going to be a Badmoon Deff Dread, I wanted it to look very Badmoony. So I cut out a rough moon shape, well the top of the moon shape and the bottom of the moon shape, which I was able to attach to the top of the Deff Dread and the bottom. I was just going to use this as a rough guide, as a template of where the moon shaped face was going to be. I then padded it out with green stuff, and I know there's going to be people screaming out loud, "No, that's too much for green stuff, you should have used milliput or blue tack and super glue or bloody plasticine and cement," I don't know. But I had plenty of green stuff knocking about, and I only ever use it in tiny little quantities. So I thought, you know what, this bit's been open for ages, before it guns off, I'm just going to whack it on. So I built the moon around the top one first, and then the bottom. Once I'd got the basic shape of the moon, I was able just to clad the whole thing in 0.5mm plastic card. Now some of these were just little bits of scraps I just stuck on here and there. Some of them are bent around the shape, give them corners and what have you, just to get a more sort of patchwork effect. You can see I've also added the Deff Dread jaw plate back on, a little bit lower than it normally is. And I cut one of the teeth short, just so the eyepiece with the sight on can actually see. The eyepiece sight is off the Onega Dune Crawler, which only needed slight heating and bending to make it fit around the Deff Dread can. And I also put a Shoota on the right eye, just because extra dakka. I made a little nose as well out of some plastic card. Just a thick bit of 2mm plastic card for the main part of the nose, and then a couple of 1mm bits on the side, just for little nostrils. I found that I had to add some additional armour plates on the main body of the can, just to blend it in. Then spent an ungodly amount of time adding rivets, or nuts and bolts really, if I'm being honest. And a couple of times where I couldn't be bothered to put them in, I would just drill a little hole where one of the nuts and bolts has fallen out. When I cut the bottom of the Deff Dread off, some of the domes where the legs normally fit were still visible, just the top parts of it. I trimmed them down, but it left a kind of barrel with a hole in it, and it was a bit unsightly, so I just covered those up with a couple of armour plates, with the glyphs on. At this point I wanted a test fit, so I just stuck it together with some blue tack, and thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. I also chased an intercessor. As you can also see, I've mounted a crane on his right shoulder. Now, if he's got this massive heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, I just figured it was quite heavy, and you could do with a bit of a hand, you know, lifting it up and guiding it round, hence the crane to support it. That's where I attached the crane on with a few bits from kits that I have no idea where they're from. And because the joint of the shoulder pad was a little bit rough, a little bit of sprue glue just to fill the gap. And later on when it was dry, I went over it with a X-Acto knife and just scored a little bit of detail onto it. Now because he's got a crane on his right shoulder, he needed something on his left shoulder too. So I took the normal onslaught Gatling cannon from the Deff Dread, the one that goes under his power fist, and I stuck an ammo box from a big Shoota on it, cut the ammo feed slightly so it fit, stuck the scope on it from the knob out of the original boys kit, and also with a little bit of green stuff that I'd rolled up, just joining the scope up to the main body of the gun. Basically, any spare bit of green stuff I have, I just roll these little wires now, and I find them very useful. And I use one of the weapon mounting studs from the Deff Dread kit just to give it a little stand. With the build over, it was time to start painting, so I stuck it all on cocktail sticks, rammed it into polystyrene and primed it all black with high coat matte black. Then went over it with an airbrush. All the arms were just airbrushed with Vallejo gunmetal, and the bodies I went over with a couple of shades of grey, working up to white to try and get some sort of zenithal highlight, and then hit it up with Avalon Sunset, which just seemed to make it all go to one shade of yellow again. It's also worth saying at this point, you can probably see on the Deff Dread body, on the back of it, there's 2 exhausts coming up. I didn't want to have 2 big engines with the 4 exhausts, so I just slightly carved the back, stuck one engine block directly in the centre, and then blanked off the either side of it with a couple of armour panels, roughed up rivets, you know the score. Once I got the base colours on, I went and painted all the silver bits on the yellow bits and all the yellow bits on the silver bits. Then, with some thinned down Agrax earth shade, I was able to start adding some weathering, mostly in the recess parts, but also around the underside to give the bottom parts of the panels a little bit more of a darker shade than the upper bits. To help this, I also thinned down some yellow, Avaland and then Uriel yellow, and used that to sort of glaze the upper parts just a little bit, just to give a little bit more of a highlight. Eager to see how the body and legs fit together, I had a little bit of a test fit. There's its right side, and there's its left side. Just yellow and silver at this point. And there it is with all the arms on. I'd already done the base at this point as well. That's just a Vallejo earth texture. Once it's semi-dried, you can sort of play around with it a bit, pop the crater on. And then I often just put a wash directly on the colour itself, as that was brown earth, it was already the colour I wanted. So I put a wash on with some Agrax Earthshade Gloss, which I bought in error, and I'm desperate to use it. And then, and then just dry brush it up with khaki up to bone white, and then to an off-white at the end, just to pick out some final highlights. And the rest was pretty straightforward, just adding in extra colours, just to try and break it up a bit so it wasn't so busy. I put a lot of the Vallejo blue-green on, like I normally do, give it a wash of a thinned down darker blue, and then highlight it up on the edges with Vallejo blue-green with a little bit of white in it. A couple of red panels, again, like I normally do, with corn red, a wash with Army Painter red tone, and then pick a little bit of highlight out with some Evil Sun Scarlet. I also painted some chip damage on it, just using the classic method of a little splotches of Rhinox hide, and highlighting the underneath with a brighter yellow. That was just, I believe, pure Uriel yellow. And on the edge of the armour panels, the odd bit of chipped up bare metal, and again I went round the jagged lines with that lighter yellow. I also ended up sticking on an additional Deff Dread shoulder pad just above the Gatling cannon on the right upper arm, and with that I just painted the whole thing in black and white checks, because it was sorely missing some at this point, with the Vallejo blue-green on the spikes. So there you go, Badmoon Shoota Dread. I'm really pleased how he came out. I was a little bit concerned he was going to look a little bit busy. Well, he does look a little bit busy, so, you know, concern's well founded. And on certain stills, it's a little bit difficult to make certain things out, but that's where I've put the video rotating it, because you can actually see the details then. He is a big lad. There we go, there's a Primaris next to him. Paul's got one of these knocking about, I've no idea why. It was the first mini I painted when I got back into the hobby, and obviously I hadn't found my way yet. You know, ultramarine. Ugh. But there you go. It's a little bit modelling for disadvantage, but that never bothers me. It's all about the models looking cool, because I think that's what the hobby's about really for me. So, I hope you enjoyed the video and the build. So, hit like and subscribe if you did. In fact, you know what? Hit like and subscribe even if you didn't. Get on, man. Don't be shy. Just do it. Nice one. Cheers. And I'll leave you with a little bit of a montage with that spinny video and a few stills as well, just on some details. And until the next time, take care. Ta-da.